Hello, everyone, and welcome to Burnout Triumphants. I'm here with my guest, Grant Gurewitz. Could you show yourself? Yeah. Hey, Grant.
Hey there, Pavel. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm very glad to have you on tonight. Well, everyone, you're watching Burnout Triumphants episode 8. A little shout out to Digiburn. Digiburn is a digital tool supporting young and experienced professionals to track their mental well being, improve their lifestyle, and achieve the dedicated work life balance. Grant Gurewitz is my guest today. A very interesting guy working in marketing, but also dedicating, it seems like, a lot of time and energy into his website and newsletters, which aim to educate people about burnout and some things about their life perception and lifestyle. So, hey, Grant, I'm very glad to have you on today. You're obviously really into discussing the burnout issue and reading your website. I think you have a lot to say, but let's rewind a bit. Tell me about yourself. Where did you go to university? What do you do? Let's get to know you a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's great to be on. And yeah, as you said, I work full time in marketing and have for about 10 years. But this topic of burnout is so near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure we'll get into my story and whatnot. But yeah, so I live here actually in the states, in the Seattle area. I attended university at the University of Oregon, um, and personally, I and really enjoy kayaking. I enjoy biking. I planted a veggie garden this past year, so I've enjoyed that quite a bit. And the thing is, I always list those items first, since I am really passionate about making sure that the things I actually like um, and prioritize ahead of work. So those are my real passions. But as far as work goes, I've worked in digital marketing for the last 10 years or so, and it's been a great career for me to have.
Yeah, wow, that's great. Well, I mean, yeah. What do you say? Let's get into the meat of the matter. Tell me about burnout. I guess. How did everything start? Like, what was your environment? How did your life look back then?
Yeah, so right as I was graduating from university and coming into the professional world doing marketing, I actually started in social media marketing initially. And right as I was coming out of university, it was right as Instagram had launched, kind of in the kind of early heyday of Twitter and Facebook. And so we had this environment where we had all these social media platforms, and there were a lot of kind of what I call shiny things happening out there, right? Where we had like new things coming, new features, and it was a lot to keep up with. So I think like that was kind of like one part of my initial story where I was like always kind of chasing kind of the new thing and trying to prove my worth to my company, and like really, even if it wasn't necessarily high value items I was working on, it felt important because it was like a new platform or something like that, and I felt like I had to be there. So I think that was kind of piece one of it for me. And then the other piece was, when you're in a culture and you kind of are young and impressionable and you see other people in your workspace who are working all the time, who are responding to emails after that they've gone home for the day,
Yeah.
who are responding to emails when they are listed as supposed to be taking vacation. You kind of get put into this place where you, even though it's not explicitly said, you kind of start to feel this implicit pressure that I should also be doing those things. So I started working more, working harder, um, maybe taking time off, but not fully taking time off to rest and restore like I needed to. And trying to listen to podcasts and read articles about the hottest new social media thing of the day. I remember distinctly. I don't know if you remember the platform Peach that came out. I don't even know how many years ago now, but there's articles where like, oh, it's going to be the next big platform. So I invested a lot of time in kind of spinning up a strategy for that. And of course, we don't know what Peach is today. So it kind of goes to show you it's hard to differentiate, I guess, between what is Peach and what's TikTok or something like that. Like what's going to be the next big thing. So that was kind of it for me. Just kind of in my initial story to at least set the foundation for how I ended up getting to burnout for myself.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like. Do you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
Oh, that's weird. Okay, I just don't hear myself. That's okay. I mean, yeah, it sounds like just information overload. I mean, listening to podcasts all the time, reading articles, all that. I mean, it can get to you, and I think it makes you feel like you're not doing anything even more so than just not listening to those podcasts. And you know, but again, not reading and not listening, that's also probably not great. But I think there's a nice medium, which, yeah, it's sometimes it's hard to not go overboard with it.
Mhm.
So
And listen, you don't always pick right. Like there are some things where like you invest a lot of time and energy and it's the wrong thing. And that'll happen from time to time. But trying to like as you grow as a person and grow in your career and your industry and understanding like what are the areas that like you can take a big bet on that's like going to be worth the time investment, that's really going to be high priority work. I think is a big important area.
yeah, yeah, I think it's I mean, it's okay to dedicate time to stuff that doesn't matter in the end of the day. I mean, you still learn some things about it that, they could be worth it. So, I mean, you worked in marketing. Would you say that like this career segment is kind of you can see burnout employees there? Because I feel like people expect like five different jobs to be burnout prone, and it's so much more than that. I mean, almost everyone can burn out.
Yeah. No, I mean, certainly, I think marketing, like almost any other job, I think can be burnout prone, and it's going to look different. And of course, in the last couple of years with the pandemic, like healthcare workers, teachers, and a lot of other those fields have been certainly impacted by burnout. But I really don't see burnout as like a yes or no sort of
Right.
item. I see it really a lot more as a spectrum, right? And I think living through a pandemic and climate change and global issues that are happening, like I think there's probably very few people realistically who are like so far on the I'm thriving end of the spectrum. I think a lot of us are probably somewhere on that a little bit on the other end of the spectrum. And I really do see it as between kind of a fried end of the spectrum and a thriving end of the spectrum, essentially. But for me, like what I really try and think about now is I don't I don't try to necessarily always achieve thriving, since to me, I think that's unrealistic and that's unsustainable on a day to day basis, since there's
Sure.
just so much stuff that happens to us as individuals and in the world that to me it feels like such a large energy expenditure to try and always be right at thriving. So I try and stay right below it a little bit. So I'm kind of like an arm's reach, but that feels like a more sustainable kind of mindset and pace for me to be at most of the time.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, everything when it's at the extremes, it's not really sustainable. And I really agree with you that it's more of a spectrum than a yes or no question. Like you can be really burnt out, like physical problems, everything. You can be just a little burnt out as well. I mean, kind of nervous all the time. So it's definitely a spectrum. It's not something that either happens or doesn't happen, and it's not something that has specific things that happen to the people that have it. I mean, that's why it's a syndrome. A lot of different stuff happens. It's for some people it's worse, for some people it's better. It's like that. So yeah, but I find it really interesting what you said about you know, kind of feeling like I don't remember if you said that. I mean, I might just be gathering this, but it kind of feels to me as well that we almost are feel like we're expected to be at that thriving stage, and I think that has a lot to do with just us listening to a lot of other people. I mean, like people on Instagram, gurus like okay, I'm not gonna drop any names, but yeah, I mean, there's hustle culture is a big deal, and I've heard you talk about it. You've written about it on your website. So it's definitely a thing to be worried about. So I'm wondering, keeping hustle culture in mind, how do you think work is going to look like in the future?
Yeah, well, I think if we go back to, I guess, my story and how I actually really burnt out, to me, like I see my burnout in kind of two waves. Like my first wave was kind of what I was describing, where I was just overworking myself and kind of a pretty typical burnout from work story. But my second wave of burnout was where I think it gets a little more interesting, since I said I'd been listening to all these podcasts to like help myself professionally. So what I ended up doing, where I was like, okay, I'm burned out from work and where do I go from here? So I kind of turned to what I knew, which was podcasts and that you're talking about, and like some of these articles and people on Instagram and whatnot, to be like, okay, clearly these people have it figured out. They can kind of show me the way. So what I basically ended up doing is I got to this point where I had like this massive daily routine, like all the things of like waking up at 5 a.m., journaling, doing like all this kind of stuff before breakfast. I was reading on my commute into work. I was reading it during my lunch break. I like had this like evening routine. So I was basically programmed from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed, which I mean, all of that is kind of the definition I would say of hustle culture. And realistically, I was trying to get myself out of burnout, but the kind of let's call it the influencers and kind of like the life hack gurus um, that are out there to that are supposed to kind of like help make me well actually pushed me even deeper into this kind of state of burnout, which was disappointing. Obviously, I wanted to get out of it, and I just got pushed even deeper into it. And I don't know. I just remember I had like probably close to 9 months, and this is back in like 2016 or so, where I had close to 9 months where I would come into work and like could barely have enough energy to like send a couple emails or something like that. I was just, I didn't luckily have like physical aspects of like my burnout, but just like the mental like exhaustion was a lot for me to try and overcome.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, totally turning to uh, people that you expect to help you, and then them not doing it. Really, I mean, it sucks. Probably. Yeah, I mean, that's a lesson in itself. That it's something. It's a really interesting topic, but I mean, let's really not concentrate on it because I think we can spend 2 hours talking about hustle culture. At least myself. There's a lot to say about it, and it definitely affects people in different ways. I think there's people that it's really great for, watching videos like that, content like that, and it could be motivating maybe for some people. But I mean, for me and obviously for you, it kind of does the wrong thing.
Yeah,
So
and I mean, what I'll say on hustle culture is like I think it is a path for people, and clearly it is a popular path, and there are enough of the influencers out there talking about it. But what I'm really passionate about, and what I discovered for myself, is that hustle culture is not the only path, and I think that's something that gets lost in the conversation sometimes, where like you can find success and you can like be happy in your life, and there are other paths to achieve that, and I think like that's the important takeaway.
yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and yeah, it kind of concentrates on success being like monetary, but we'll touch on that in a little bit. Let's talk about your burnout. So you told me how it looked in the beginning. I mean, when it all started to go downhill for you, was there like a low point? Like, how did things look when you were like at your worst? Was it those 9 months where you just didn't have any energy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely one of the larger aspects of it. But yeah, I remember so distinctly there was this moment for me that was like the straw that broke the camel's back, kind of like the catalyst moment where I had some family up visiting here in Seattle, and we were touring around town. And I just remember it was a Saturday, so the weekend I was supposed to be off, and I logged into Facebook since I was managing Facebook groups and communities at that time, and there was like a fire drill, just kind of this social media emergency happening like that
Yeah.
I saw unfolding. So I just distinctly remember like as we were touring around, like I pulled myself from my wife and my family, let them continue going off and doing what they were doing, and just like sat on a bench for I don't even know how long, honestly. Like I think my brain kind of went away there for a little bit. But it was kind of that moment where it was like for the third weekend in a row on a Saturday, I was pulling myself from my time and my life to deal with work. And it was just kind of this moment where it was the moment where I had had enough. And it took me some time to get out of that necessarily, but that was kind of at least the final like light bulb. I think that went off in my head that I was like, okay, this isn't sustainable. This isn't what I want my life to look like.
Yeah, it's a red flag for sure. Yeah, I mean, good for you that you changed it. I mean, at the end of the day, that's great. Um, what I want to talk about is we have two types of guests uh, when we do these interviews. Some of them feel like they had like a sudden moment of blink. Okay, oh damn, I'm burning out. I need to do something about it like immediately. And then there's other people that uh, had a little bit more of a gradual understanding of first of all what burnout is, and then maybe I should change that, maybe I should change that. Like, how did that look for you? Like the moment you decided to change your lifestyle, was it like immediate? Was it gradual? What did you do?
Yeah, no, great question. And yeah, I see where those kind of two sides come into play. And I think what's interesting for me is like I realized like I was like exhausted and I was tired, but at that time I didn't really recognize it or call it burnout. I think there's kind of like this taboo around like that, and like you would be weak if you were to burn out. So like it was something that I wasn't willing to accept for myself. Frankly, it was only a couple years later, actually, like a year or two ago, that I feel like I finally recognized it as burnout for myself, which I think is an important caveat there. But yeah, as far as like kind of what started to get me out of burnout, I'd kind of call it two different things that kind of like came together at once. The first being while I was on kind of this crash course of going through every podcast and self help book and articles and everything like that, I came across the work of the blue zones. Are you familiar with that? Have you heard of that before?
No.
No, okay. So basically, for you and for the listeners, it's a kind of an anthropology work where it looks at the longest lived pockets of people around the world, and basically looks at like what are their daily habits, what do they just do to stay happy and healthy and thrive to usually to be 100 years old and still be functional humans at 100 years old, which is pretty cool. There's ones in Costa Rica, Italy, Greece, Japan, all over the world. So it's really, really neat project. And all of the commonalities of these people were they, of course, weren't working crazy hours at a job. They weren't like doing these unsustainable, crazy diets and fitness routines and all of that kind of stuff. Their day to day life looked like having meaningful people and conversations around them. They were eating well, they were moving their body and just living a happy life that way. So that was kind of the I guess the knowledge that helped kind of shine a light on a different path other than hustle culture. So that was kind of the first piece of it. And then the other piece was I started like to look around my workplace and I looked at like the vice presidents and like the C-level executives, and they weren't living a life that I really wanted to live as I really thought about it. They were traveling all the time. They were working crazy hours. I would see them around the office and they just looked incredibly stressed out. And I kind of had this epiphany moment where I was like, I don't know that I necessarily want to pursue the quote unquote standard like career path of like continuing to grow to each level, to become a VP or become a chief marketing officer or something like that. So I think both of those two areas of kind of like learning about a different path and just having this epiphany moment for myself was a really important catalyst for understanding like what I wanted things to look like for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you hear me?
I do, yes.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I really agree with you. It's really interesting that about success, like it's generally, I mean, at least that's what I think, that most people think of it as monetary, and it's great things happen when I mean when you define your own meaning of success, because I don't know why we take it as something that has like a strict definition. Like it's not a dictionary, and for me, success is one thing, and for you, it's a completely different thing. And I think it's really really important that you talk about that and that people do it. Yeah, you should really take time to try and realize what success means to you. So I
Yeah,
really agree with that. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. No, I think, and that's where like as I was looking at like did like in the kind of traditional kind of like call it capitalist society, success looks like climbing the career ladder, earning a
Yeah.
lot of money, like creating a lot of power for yourself. And I mean, certainly, like I want to be financially comfortable. I've had times in my life where, like, I was living paycheck to paycheck, and that's hard and that's not comfortable. So I want to be like stable, but there reaches a point of diminishing returns. I think, in that where if you're always moving the goalpost for yourself, where nothing's ever good enough, and you're going to keep chasing and keep kind of burning out. I think so. Really, what I try to think about for my definition of success instead of money and power is more along the lines of how can I create a life for myself where I have as much control of my time as possible? And that's kind of the main metric that I'm looking at in terms of how I judge success for myself. And it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes rebuilding a lot of habits and mindset to kind of think that way. But ultimately, at this point, like a lot of my habits and the decisions I make and the work that I say yes to all aligns with that definition of success. So to me, that's really the most important, like, first step. If you're in a place right now where I'm feeling like, man, I'm fried or I'm burned out, like, that and thinking about like how you define success in your life, to me, is like the absolute number one first step, most important step in really getting out of burnout and giving yourself permission to kind of free yourself from that.
Yeah, yeah. I really agree with that. So your burnout started, then you fixed it, kind of. And how do you live right now? How do you not burn out now? What do you do?
Yeah, so basically, so I had, after kind of like having these epiphanies and whatnot, I probably took 2 years to really kind of trial and error some things, and then even another 2 years to really make sure that they worked, since I wanted to find like a path that was doable and sustainable on a day-to-day basis. I didn't want to have like this like crazy list of habits that I was supposed to be doing that I could maintain for a couple weeks, but then I would like fall off the cliff. So it was really
Yeah.
important to me that I got it right. And basically, where I'm at today is like I've kind of created a playbook for myself, and I share it through my newsletter and other writings. But the playbook that I've written for myself basically has four different core chapters. So what I'll do is I can go through the four different kind of chapters. I can give a couple examples from each of those chapters. And Pavel, feel free to chime in at any time here. But the first
Sure.
chapter for me is kind of what we were just talking about, which is this idea of downsizing your relationship with work. So this is everything about your mindset. It's how you define success. It's also this concept that I've been thinking about and talking about a lot lately that people seem to like, which is this idea of aiming to only like your job. And what I mean by that is, I think in culture today, there's a popular narrative that like you need to find work that you love. This concept of if you find work that you love, you'll never work a day in your life, like that sort of concept,
Yeah.
um, which I think in theory is good, but there's also the other side of that, is finding work that you love and you'll never stop working is, I think, kind of the other side to that conversation. And so essentially, I really in my mind try to find work that I like. And even if I really kind of love the work sometimes, I want to keep it at the like level. So I always prioritize the people and the things that I actually love first ahead of work. So I think that's a really important first part of this. And I think the other part of this too, for this idea of like downsizing your relationship with work, that has, I think, also like really accelerated since the pandemic started. People are having a lot of like epiphanies about what work means to them and what they want it to mean in their life. But this idea that in hustle culture, I think rest is kind of the enemy, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
taking time off, you are leaving productivity on the table essentially.
Yeah.
And I don't think that could be further from the truth. I know for myself, like, I need to take time off. I need to be able to recalibrate and recharge myself so I can be doing my best work when I'm working. And so I think making rest not the enemy and actually making rest a friend is a really important part of my first chapter in my burnout prevention playbook.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, rest is like is actually on your side. Rest can be your weapon to deal with work. It's extremely important, and I'll sleep when I die type of mindset that
Right.
doesn't work. So definitely,
And
definitely agree with that.
yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, so the World Health Organization actually put out
Yeah,
last year in 2021 its first report on death by overwork, which is kind of a jarring report title, but found that there are, I think, 775,000 people that had died from basically overwork complications and whatnot. So the mantra and the idea of like hustle now, rest, and kind of reap the benefits later is maybe a little short-sighted, to put it morbidly, that you have to get to later, right?
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm sorry that my camera's not on. I'm just having some issues. My colleague is taking care of it. um, but yeah, I totally agree with that. And about loving work, I think there is a line that can be crossed and become an obsession. So if that's what you're saying, I see it. I see that it could happen. I think work shouldn't be the focal point of your life at all. I mean, that's when problems arise, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, like I like the job a lot that I'm doing right now. So
Yeah,
I
sure.
think I think the idea is like certainly aim to find work that you like on most days. No job is perfect, but aim to find work that you like on most days. But continue to always prioritize yourself and the hobbies and the people around you that you love, so they don't get pushed to the side. Since realistically, that's what happened to me when I was burning out too. I was working so hard at work that I wasn't nurturing my friendships, and just like taking the time to even have any hobbies. I didn't have any hobbies at that time, so I didn't even have like a an outlet to go to when I was feeling so overwhelmed from work.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Well, let's get to the next chapter. I have a you sent me them. I see it. It says "Make Work Work," which is a really nice title. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so yeah, chapter two, after downsizing your relationship with work, is this idea of making work actually work. How, like, we talk about this a lot. So the three kind of like more tactical things I would say in this chapter is this idea that I came across a study last year that basically finds that if you're working 38 hours a week, that is for a lot of people can be the happy medium between like feeling like you're giving enough to your work but also having time in your life to recharge and whatnot. So in the traditional 40 hours a week model, like that's only two less hours a week. So I really try and subscribe to this and work about 38 hours a week in my job. And to me, like the way I use that is I actually kind of created a rule around it where I said if the work was not important enough to make it into my 38 hours in a week, it wasn't important enough for me and it wasn't important enough for the company. So that was a really important rule that I kind of laid out for myself. The
Yeah,
other kind of tool that I would offer is this idea of using goal setting as a defense mechanism, essentially, that you can use against your job. So I think for most of us, like we all go through some sort of either quarterly or yearly or monthly goal setting exercise. So it's really important to not just treat those as a throwaway item. The goal setting process I think is really important, where you get a chance to align with your boss and with yourself too, to understand what is realistic that you can take on and what's going to be high impact. And once you basically cement those goals for the time period, keep revisiting them. And that's really important, since I know if you're like me, like you probably have different priorities at work that fly in all the time, right,
yeah,
from left field and right field.
yeah,
And it can be really hard to then absorb that into the things you're already supposed to be taking on. So what I really encourage you to do is always treat those new high priority items as a trade off conversation where you say, hey, these goals for the quarter are what we agreed to that I have the capacity to take on. And if this new priority is in fact a high priority, what are we going to trade out from the other area? And always treat that as a trade off conversation. So that's really important tactic. And then the last tactic I'll kind of offer is just getting comfortable with the idea. And this kind of goes back to resting a little bit, that there are different speeds and paces throughout the year at work. So you're
yeah,
going to have like an acceleration pace, you're going to have a normal pace, you're going to have a slow pace, and you're going to have a resting pace, and getting really comfortable and being at peace that all of those are important and are going to exist at different times. And personally, from like an acceleration pace, like that might be right before the launch of a big project or a new product or something like that. And I kind of, not a hard and fast rule, but I usually think that I can handle about like 3 to 4 kind of acceleration periods a year, and that's kind of like the barometer that I have in my head.
yeah. We actually talked about exactly about that with I think it was episode 3 with Lino Velev. That's what he said, that spikes of stress are great for you. They're good. Stressful, let's say 5 stressful days, and then two resting days, and then if you do that for a little bit, it's actually good for you. I mean, cortisol is good in these levels, but problems start to arise when it's all like a constant level of just a little bit of stress, just that little
Hmm.
bit that it's a bit too much. If that stays for a long time, um that's where things go wrong. But if i if I heard like two things from what you said, I think first thing is try to get a bit more control over your work. And then the
Hmm.
second one is prioritize and set smart goals. I think those things. I don't know if you agree with me, but those things should be great to do. And I mean, that's what I gathered from your words, and I really agree with that. You know, it's great to try to have control over stuff that you can have control over, and it's good to let go things that you can have control over, like the speeds of work, like you said. I mean, it's all a really complex game of I care about this, I don't care about that. I mean, you really have to work on it, and yeah, sounds like you know your stuff about that.
Yeah, no, and I think like the acceleration and some of those stressful periods, like that's where the growth is going to come from. And I think
Hmm.
the other common misconception that people could have about my work and the way I kind of like approach things is that I don't care about growing. I'm not like a driven, growth-minded individual, and that's also like couldn't be further from the truth. But I kind of like pick my spots, so to speak. So I'm not like chasing everything. Like I'm pretty intentional about the way I work and the things that I chase.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's get into the next chapter. I mean, you said you had
Um,
four, so
yeah.
let's see what you got.
Yeah, it's a complex issue for sure. So yeah, first
Yeah,
chapter is downsizing the relationship with work. The second chapter is about work itself. So how do you make work work? The third chapter is really about how do you build really strong boundaries around work, so you have like a good
yeah,
line of separation between your work and your life. Since I know for so many people this has been a really hard part, as many have moved to remote work or hybrid work in the last couple of years. So the couple quick tips I would offer around this area is to create a really strong like end of day ritual. So when you close your laptop for the day, you're done with work for the day. So
yeah,
that's really important. For me, usually I try and log off like shortly before 4 o'clock. I then do some sort of exercise. Again, I'm not super prescriptive about what I do since I just aim to move my body. So some days that's weightlifting, some days that's bike riding, some days that's running, some days that's just going on a walk. So I try and do that, and then I usually make dinner, and that's kind of like my mental signal that okay, I'm done with work for the day. Along with that, to help enable that is the just either silencing or even better removing some of the work apps from your phone, so you really have that clear line of separation. So email, Slack, Microsoft Teams, whatever the tools are that you're using, remove those from your phone, or at least silence them, so you're not getting the notifications and not feeling like the mental pull of them. And even if you're not responding, like I did this for a while where like I told myself like, hey, I'm not going to respond to anything, but I was still looking, and I would look at like 9 o'clock at night, 9:30, as I was like starting to think about getting ready for bed. But the problem with even looking is like your mind starts to spin on some of these topics, and then it can impact your sleep. So it's really important to give yourself a number of hours between when you go to sleep, in my opinion, and when you log off from work, so you have enough kind of wind down time. And then the last and final, most important piece of your boundaries is taking time off. And when I say taking time off, as you can probably guess, that means taking it 100% off and giving yourself the space to recharge and recuperate.
yeah. I mean, great points, great points. I mean, it can be kind of scary to like ignore work apps or delete them, but I think it's a really great step that people should take. And for me, it's also kind of scary, like, but what if something's happening? And the truth is, nothing big is happening at 11 at night. Like, you can deal with that tomorrow, and you're not gonna be the bad guy for it. So yeah, I think take that leap and silence them or delete them, and don't look at them. I really agree with that. Even if you're looking at them, it's the same thing. You're still like letting your mind go back to work mode, and that's not good. And about the ritual, it's a really great thing that you thought of, because I think especially when we started working from home, we're also mashing places together. So if you have your living room, which is the room for watching TV and having dinner with family, and then that becomes like an office, it's like a great psychological clash between those signals that you gave yourself before. You don't have to commute to work. You're not in a working environment. You're home in pajamas on the table that you eat lunch at. So it's really important to have something to at least, signal that you're not working anymore. And that's great. I really agree with that.
Yeah, when you're done working, be done working. I think that's the most important point there.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. Well,
Should we move on to the last chapter?
yeah, we have one last.
All right, let's do it. So, okay, so if chapter one's about your mindset, chapter two is about the nuts and bolts of within the workday, chapter three is about building your boundaries. Chapter four is kind of a departure from that. And I think a lot of people think that burnout from work happens only within work. But as I was talking about my story, like a lot of my second wave of burnout was really when I was just making this crazy life for myself outside of work. So chapter four is all about this idea of unprogramming your well-being, and I really get inspiration from that kind of naming from the work of blue zones that I was talking about, which is this idea of like let's think about things that have worked for people for hundreds of thousands of years to make them happy and healthy in their life. So this idea that we don't need like this necessarily overly complex diet, tracking your macros, having like some crazy fitness plan, if that's not bringing you joy and bringing you happiness. So what I actually started, I created this method kind of just happenstance right at the beginning of the pandemic when everyone was kind of like, okay, world's going crazy and how can I kind of stay sane? And I called it three good pockets. And what
Yeah.
I mean by three good pockets is this idea that like you're going to have some unmovable boulders in your life. You're going to have children, you're going to have work commitments, you're going to have just life that happens. Those aren't necessarily movable or very easily movable. But around those boulders, like there's always time for three good pockets of time. And it's kind of like that same principle of like, if you put sand into a jar first and then the big rocks, like it's not going to fit. But if you put the big rocks in first and then can kind of pour the sand over it, like there's space in between all those big rocks or those boulders. So
Wow. Yeah.
essentially, what three good pockets of time for me is this idea, yeah, where we, I basically I created initially like a chart on for myself of like a pick list of like all of the activities, the things that brought me joy and happiness in my life, and basically aim to just do three of them every single day. So it might be some form of exercising, it might be cooking, it might be reading for 10 minutes, and I think like that's the important parts. And some people may say like, hey, I don't even have time for one tiny item in my day outside of work. But I think like if you use three good pockets well, like you can say like, hey, I'm maybe reading for a couple minutes in the morning. I'm preparing myself a quick lunch, and I'm getting
Yeah.
a chance to go on a walk in the afternoon. And that's three good pockets. So I this is actually in kind of my community that I've built like absolutely far and away like people's favorite tip and thing that they've really latched onto the most, where yeah, there's so much crap you can't deal with out there, but like you can control three kind of short periods of time in your day.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I read that one on your website, and it's really cool. I'll put it in the description, that exact article, because I think it's great for people to read. And I really agree with that. That metaphor was great with the jar and the rocks. I didn't think about it like that, and it really makes sense. So yeah, that's great. And I was listening to a podcast. That's kind of ironic, but yeah, I was listening to a podcast a while ago, and they were talking about how it doesn't get better, like, ever. If you want to do something, you should find time to do it, and there surely is time that you can take care of things that really matter. So if things matter to you, you have to take time to do it.
Yeah, I agree. There's a similar meme that I saw recently too, which was yeah, this idea of like adult life is basically just saying things will get less busy next week until you die, which
Yeah,
again is a little morbid, but kind of true about adult life.
yeah, it's funny. Yeah, well, that's great. Can people find this, like, all together somewhere?
Yeah, so great question. So I've been writing about this topic since about 2018 or so. But as I said, I spent 2 years to really refine what this playbook looks like. So you've mentioned my website a few times. It's grantgurewitz.com. I believe it's in the description of the episode here. But what I really do through my writing is try to demystify this process as much as possible. Since when I was going through burnout, and trying to maintain a corporate job. Like I wasn't in a position like many of the articles say, like, hey, if you're burned out, just quit your job. Like that wasn't attainable for me. And I think for a lot of people, that's not the right step for you to take. So all of my writing really centers around creating and writing a playbook for corporate knowledge workers who need and want to keep their job, their corporate job, but want to not feel fried and want to figure out how to play defense against work and kind of downsize their relationship with work a bit. So, in addition to my website, I actually have two different newsletters that I write. One is called Sustain, which is kind of the big one that I've been writing since 2018. And it talks about some big ideas, big theories around the future of work, about burnout. And then I actually just introduced a brand new newsletter called How I Quit Burnout, which is my step by step playbook that I kind of previewed a little bit here with the different chapters and a few of the tips from those chapters. So that's the first ever kind of step by step playbook that I've written and really shared. And I think it's going to be immensely helpful for people. I know there's a lot of people who are already signed up for that one and really eager to start getting those tips on a week by week basis.
Yeah, sure. I'm back. Camera's back.
Just in time.
Yeah, just in time. But yeah, quitting, as you touched on that, quitting doesn't necessarily fix anything. You could be unemployed and burn out because you're stressing that you're unemployed. I mean, yeah, you can burn out from everything, from anything, but it's great. And yeah, quitting your job totally isn't something that's really attainable for people. You really have to have a lot of savings, and it's not really a smart choice to just wing it and quit a job. So it's great what you're doing. So before
I
today,
appreciate it.
yeah, before today we talked, and it's I just want to talk about this, how organizations still like see burnout like it's your problem as the employee. It's not an organizational problem. And it obviously is an organizational problem. It doesn't have to do with the individual like solely. It has to do with everyone, with every layer of management, and everyone can like take should take accountability for what's happening. So, what experiences have you had with managers, both good and bad?
Yeah, and I totally agree with your sentiment there that burnout and like employee well-being is like a very interesting topic for companies right now. I think every company is like very acutely aware of how important it is right now.
Yeah.
And I think certainly in the US, this idea of the great resignation and it's kind of been all over the world has been top of mind for people. So there's a lot of attention, there's a lot of resources, a lot of money being spent on like employee well-being and wellness programs like stipends, gym memberships, meditation apps, all of those sorts of things. And I like it's a nice step. It's a nice step. Don't get me wrong about that. But it is a band-aid. It's a fix on the surface level. It's treating the symptoms, not the problem of
Yeah.
burnout. And really the problem comes from the culture, the norms within the culture, whether they're implicit or explicit, that says to people, hey, I need to work long hours to get ahead. And that's a employee well-being culture problem that is tough to address, and it's not as simple as just rolling out a gym membership stipend. It takes a lot of really concentrated effort, and that's why I think it's probably companies are avoiding doing that. But yeah, realistically, companies place a lot of the onus and the importance on preventing burnout and well-being on the individual employee. Like here, if you take this gym membership, figure out how to use it and keep yourself well, but we're going to keep piling on the work sort of thing. So really it's a couple level layers of like importance for people who are working on this issue. Like we need the organization to really focus on the policy, the cultural norms that support employee well-being. We need the managers to enforce that and help the people on their team figure out and help prioritize and push back where appropriate. So we're asking employees to do a reasonable amount of work that they can actually do well too. Since if I were a manager, like I would much rather have my employees doing a couple really high impact things super well. How can we do less, go bigger and better with what we're doing, as
Yeah.
opposed to just trying to do everything kind of half well. And I don't think that's a good recipe for success. And then, of course, as individuals, like there's a lot that we can do as well too that we talked about as well. So
Mhm.
it takes all those three layers, but it's not fair for the company just to point the finger necessarily at the individual and say, here, this is kind of your problem to deal with, and hey, look, we're helping you by giving you a gym stipend. Like again, those are nice to haves, but if that is the solve to the problem, we're not approaching the problem in the right way.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, it's not gonna fix your burnout to go swimming.
Right.
Totally.
And it certainly could help, but it's like that is
Yeah.
not going to be the only thing. And especially like if you look at it from the standpoint of like you get burned out by doing so many things and being overloaded, and then to say, hey, here's another thing, like go
Yeah.
do it. It's just like kind of adds more fuel to the burnout fire, I think, as opposed to even helping sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. It's
And then
sort
you
of
feel bad for not going to the gym, or you feel bad for not doing the meditation app or something like that, and it's just another thing to kind of feel guilty about, and that's obviously not helping either.
yeah, oh, they gave it to me for free and then I'm not using it.
Right.
Well, I mean, they were like, "Here, there's another thing that um, to incorporate in your crazy day." So yeah, it's not really a fix. I'm seeing that we've been live for a while, so I think we should kind of close this up. I want to give you the stage. Say anything you want to say. Talk about anything you want to talk about. Your work. Where can people find you? You have the stand.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we covered a lot of ground today, and I think I'll revisit the point that we talked about earlier, which was just the idea of like how you define success. And to me, like that is like if you're looking for an actionable takeaway from this conversation, like spend some time thinking about that and how you define success, and not just how you think society wants you to define success or like how culture wants you to define success, but truly like how you for yourself and your family and the loved ones around you make the most sense to define success.
Yeah.
And again, for me, that is working so I can make money and I can provide the lifestyle that I want to live. But thinking about like what is the point of diminishing returns where I don't feel like I need to be going all effort to chase the next promotion all the time or something like that. But that said, like I did get promoted last year, so like this sort of concept can work, and like thinking about the right things. So that's where I'd leave is just the idea of like really honing in and thinking about success and the habits and the behaviors that align to how you think about success. And yeah, as I just shared, my website, my two newsletters are where I put all my best work. But you can follow me on LinkedIn. I do a lot of posting on LinkedIn as well. So that's where to find me.
Yeah, well, everyone, both links are in the description to his website and his LinkedIn account. So feel free to go over and read. I mean, the website is great. I checked out a lot of it, and I think it can be really helpful. So everyone, make sure to actually visit it and read about it. So yeah, thank you, Grant. I mean, it was great talking to you. I think we had a good conversation, and I'm happy with what we did.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me and taking the time. And yeah, hopefully it helps people. And that's ultimately what I'm after here is I just have this, it's a big goal, but I really want to eliminate burnout at work. And I think it's possible. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. And yeah, we can go do this together.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I think you certainly will help some people. Well, thank you. And everyone, make sure to subscribe, comment, and like the video. And if you have any questions for us or for Grant, maybe we can send him some questions. Maybe he could answer them. We'll see. But if you have any questions, make sure to comment down below. And yeah, thank you for watching. And remember, burn bright, not out.